Hey everybody, welcome to the Chaos Gym, and we're doing episode 2 of Card Dissection with Mikey Fouchet, expert in Accelgor.
What's up, everybody? Good to be here.
So, as you guys, if you haven't watched last week's episode, check that out with Fred. And this week we're just gonna grind into Accelgor, talk about the past, present, and potentially future of the card. It's been around for quite literally forever, since I've started playing. It came out in Dark Explorers with other notable cards: Darkrai EX, Dark Patch, Sableye, all those powerhouse cards. And I'll let Mikey talk a little bit about some of the powerhouse decks that Accelgor had a place in.
Yeah, so that was Dark Explorers came out it was our spring set in 2012, so right before Nationals. So Nationals that year was the time where all of these cards were going to be put into use first. All the hype was really around Darkrai and Dark Patch because that's so much Dark support, and we can see why, right? Like it's still
It's still
four,
around.
4.5 years later, it's still one of the best cards ever, and Dark Patch defines the expanded format, essentially. And in Worlds 2012, Darkrai Smeargle, Darkrai Mewtwo just dominated.
Yeah.
But um, but yeah, so the first Accelgor deck that really came out, when it first came out, a lot of people talked about Vileplume Accelgor, which was because the old Vileplume, very similar to the current Vileplume, shut off items for both players.
Right.
So that was kind of on people's radar, but not really a viable deck at the time, because for the same reason that Vileplume Accelgor isn't really viable now. It's really hard to keep looping Accelgors when you yourself are under item lock.
Right.
Even now, you have Forest of Giant Plants, and that's still not even a
Enough,
deck.
yeah.
Yeah, and back then, forget about it. There was a Sunflora that searched out a grass Pokemon per turn, but
I
it was,
remember that.
yeah, still very gimmicky.
Yeah.
But so the deck that ended up, but let me back up real quick. When Accelgor first came out, myself and the rest of like the X Files crew, especially Ross, we fell in love with Accelgor. We were very keen on these lock type of decks, as evidenced by the Truth, Ross's famous deck that came second. And we're always looking for these interesting ways to just totally lock the opponent out of the game using a crazy strategy. And so Accelgor is perfect. It's really the only card that I can think of off the top of my head that is a viable card that automatically paralyzes your opponent.
Nuts in every level, like in any word of the power level.
Yeah, like that's absolutely crazy. The drawback being, of course, that you have to shuffle your Pokemon back into your deck, which is a pretty big drawback, but one that is easily worked around, considering that it's a stage one for a double colorless. You see
Right.
cards like there's been like Amphoroses or Ampharos EX, something like that has auto paralyze, but it's just
Too
it's
many
not the
energy.
yeah, it's not the same. There's Mega Venusaur, right? That auto paralyzes, but that takes 4 energy. It's a Mega, not
Way,
that.
way too many drawbacks.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because Mega Venusaur does too much damage and paralyzes. Because with the Selgor, since it doesn't do that much damage, and it poisons them, you can often a lot of the Selgor decks that we'll talk about tried to finagle it so that the opponent would die coming back to you.
Right. The key of Accelgor always being perfect math, perfect lock.
Yeah, right, exactly. So with all that in mind, the first real deck that Accelgor was featured in was at U.S. Nationals 2012, and I know a lot of people played it at Worlds as well, including I think Harrison Levin might have done the best with it. But it was a Chandelure Accelgor deck that utilized Mew Prime to Lost Zone Accelgor, and Mew Prime would then go and copy Accelgor. So for those of you that don't know, Mew Prime, for a Psychic Energy, let you search through your deck and take a Pokemon there and put it in the Lost Zone. The Lost Zone being separate from discard pile, kind of like removed from play, essentially. And then Mew Prime's ability, very similar to current Mew EX, is a current Mew EX versatility. Mew Prime could copy any Pokemon's attack that was in the Lost Zone as long as it had the prerequisite energy.
Right.
So, uh, Mew Prime, Accelgor, we played Chandelure. Chandelure, when it was active, you got to put once during your turn, its ability let you put 3 damage counters wherever you wanted. We played cards like Dodrio, which is similar to the Dodrio that is out right now. It removed, I think, 2 retreat cost
Yeah, that's right. 2 retreat cost.
from your active Pokemon. We also did play Vileplume, but it was a pretty thin line. I think we played like 2-1-2 or something like that. It wasn't as high priority. But so the ultimate goal was to Lost Zone and Accelgor, get a Vileplume set up, get 1 or 2 Chandelure set up, get a Dodrio, and just continually every turn, deck and cover, send up Chandelure, and try to work out the math so that the opponent would always die from poison coming back to you. And it was, in an ideal setup, an infinite lock.
Right. And I remember, I think like there was a Relicanth back then where it was like discard a card from your hand that goes to the Lost Zone.
Yep.
Like you draw 3 or something.
Yep, that was included in some lists as another means to get Accelgor into the Lost Zone. Because yeah, you would run into times where maybe you prize an Accelgor and you have an Accelgor in your hand and you can't use Mew Prime's attack to search your deck for one. And N was not.
No, we had Pont then.
Oh yes, we did have Pont.
And like people played the babies like Pichu, Cleffa to set up really fast.
Right. Oh, and Pokemon Communication was in there too, so you could shuffle that back.
Back when that card was considered one of the best.
Yeah. Pokemon Communication was awesome. Yeah, so very interesting deck. And I was like, that really was the first example of Accelgor's power. And from then until now, Accelgor has taken many different forms and shapes. But I think, in my opinion, it's always been a force to be reckoned with. It's been more popular, less popular, given the format, given the counters, given what people are playing in their decks, because it is very dependent on if people are teching against it or not. Mm-hmm. But still, clearly still a very relevant card today in our current expanded format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I like watched that Nats. I like looked around to my left and right. I was sitting at the top tables for most of Nats, and I like would look around. I'm like, what is this deck? What are all these hodgepodge of like binder drop cards sitting in this deck? What is this synergy? And then I had a friend explain it to me, and I was like, that's crazy. So if they get the lockout, I just lose?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the only cards that you could play back then to counter it, there was an Espeon that like didn't let your guys be affected by special conditions, and there was some unknown cure that did something similar as well. But if you didn't play that, yeah.
Okay. And then unknown cure. I remember playing, like, nobody really played that card. It was just janky. I think there was no real Switch supporters or anything back then.
No.
We had like Seeker, Pont, Sages, those kind of stuff.
Right, and Seeker just pulled something from the bench, not from the active. Yeah. So
it was not. I remember like past that, I don't think the deck had too much of a showing at Worlds, because that was when Darkrai Mewtwo had its like dominance, and everyone just kind of realized how good Smeargle was.
Yeah, Darkrai was already a tough matchup because it could sometimes just out aggro you before you got your setup. And yeah, once people started playing Smeargle, it just exponentially increased that speed. And turn 1 Night Spear was so hard to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And I remember like going past that, I don't think Accelgor saw too much play throughout the 2013 season until we hit Nats when we had Gothitelle.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that deck was like, going against it, you'd always be like, oh, they're going first. Well, I really have to do something before they can candy out a Gothitelle, or I just lose the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gothitelle Accelgor. If I remember right, it was definitely a known deck going into Nats 2013, but nobody really took it seriously for some reason.
Because people needed beaches.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And then Edmund Curtis, right? He was the one that won. Yeah, he just destroyed everybody.
I think it was like I think it was like 6 of the top 8 or something was like at Nats that year was Gothgor.
Yeah.
It was something ridiculous, and people were telling me how they had to play mirrors all day, and I'm like, that sounds awful. Like, what do you do? First person to candy Gothitelle wins. They're like, yeah. pretty
Yep.
much. Because like there wasn't any real pull out of the bench cards other than catcher back then, which was auto.
Right, exactly. Um, and you played, so that deck also played Mew EX
Hmm.
to recycle Accelgors. You'll see that that's a theme with the Accelgor decks. Since Accelgor is a stage one, and all these Mew cards are or basics, it's much easier to replace Mews than it is Accelgors.
Hmm.
The other big card that helped the Gothitelle Accelgor deck was, of course, Dusknoir to help manipulate the math, like we talked about. That
Hmm.
Chandelure did a similar thing.
Yeah, and there was also Musharna, which existed to make sure you always draw the combo every turn. Once you get your deck down to those like last couple of cards.
Yeah, Musharna is crazy good. Still very good right now.
Oh yeah, I think like it took a place in your finals list, correct?
I had a 2/2.
That's a
So
big
good.
line.
It's so good. Like, and that's the thing, because Accelgor does need to constantly be refreshing their hand and getting these pieces back. Even if you shuffle a Mew and a DCE, that's still two more cards you need back to replace every single turn. And Musharna just helps you get there.
Yeah, Gothro was I think one of the most standard iterations of it. Nothing too crazy in that one. I feel like everything was just like four ofs and like candies. It was the most prevalent, and then going into 2013 Worlds, the deck just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I think it suffered from the effect that we saw with Pyro the year after, that everybody was worried about it and wanted to tech against it, and nobody wanted to play it. And so yeah, we Blastoise didn't do very well because it didn't have a great Gothitelle matchup, but Darkrai ended up doing really well because it did have a good Gothitelle matchup, and that's
Dark
just
Red
what
X
it.
just like outspeed Gothitelle, and the speed was always the issue for. And I remember I saw a couple of Blastoise lists that ended up doing semi well. That like were playing War Turtles at that point. They were playing heavier energy counts, just things to like counter the Gothitelle, because Gothitelle, if they can get the Blastoise out, is actually a very bad matchup for Goth.
Yeah, right. It kind of mattered whoever was able to get Candy stage 2 first won the matchup. So moving on from Gothitelle Accelgor, there was a Accelgor I feel like kind of fell out of favor for a long time, and it kind of just had these fringe uses, either played or seen people play over the last couple years. Some of them include Accelgor Garbodor. That was a deck. I remember Zach Bivens played it at Worlds 2014. That and maybe it was Worlds 2013 actually.
Might have been.
Yeah, I think Frank Diaz played it too actually. So similar to its current iteration, Garbodor, Accelgor plus another type of lock, ability lock, item lock, is insanely strong. And so that's why you often see Accelgor paired with these other disruptive cards.
I guess the Garb makes sense. You shut off Keldeo, you shut off like plasma stuff, you shut off Darkrai's Free Retreat.
Shut off Virizion.
That's a big one too. Virizian's probably, well, we can talk about how that was pretty much the bane of Accelgor for a little bit.
Right, exactly. So I forget when Virizion and Genesect came out. It was right after Was it right after Worlds 2014?
I think right after 2013, like shortly after.
Okay. So right after Worlds 2013, right. And that was a big reason that Accelgor did not see play, because Virizion Genesect was such a strong deck. And I think it's part of the reason that Accelgor has a place in the metagame now, today, is because Virizion Genesect is not one of the most meta-defining decks.
Yeah, back then, I remember like right after the shift, it was just like a crazy shift to everyone playing like Accelgor, Flygon, all these like weird lock decks to just it being VG, Darkrai, or like some sort of like a Raybor Blastoise meta, and I was like, what happened? It's just there's a big three and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Another fun Accelgor deck that has been piloted a lot by Russell Lepar. You kind of just mentioned it. Flygon, Accelgor, Dusknoir. Flygon puts counters on all of your opponent's Pokemon in between turns, so kind of a natural partner with Accelgor trying to manipulate the math. I don't think that ever caught on as a huge archetype because of the fact that It doesn't have an extra disruption component. It just has a way to manipulate math, and so I don't think the paralyzed lock by itself is quite enough
Right. It
to.
was more of a math deck more than like, and I'm going to keep an infinite lock going.
Yeah, right. Um,
The deck
what
also
a,
like had like ridiculous amounts of setup from back then. There's only a very few people I think that were able to pilot it very well.
yeah, I would agree with that. Um, what else do I have on my list? I played a lot of a Accelgor Flareon Garbodor deck with other various techs.
That sounds
Um,
janky.
it was very janky, but it was super fun. I remember writing a Six Prizes article about it. That was one I wasn't really too serious about the game, so I played it at a bunch of cities because it was really fun. But that was a pretty fun deck to play. Um, Accelgor Stoutland. It was always a deck that Ross and I messed around with because Stoutland, when it's active, it doesn't let your opponent play supporter cards. And while Stoutland never really saw its day to shine, Accelgor Stoutland was pretty fun. I do know Ross piloted it at least one regional championship in the past
At a
year or two.
regionals.
Oh yeah,
Dang.
yep. He didn't do that well. It's kind of a slow deck,
Hmm.
but again, still fun. And again, you have this theme of pairing a Selgor up with another type of a lock card.
Hmm.
Uh, I would say that before. Well, I guess that brings us to like Trevenant Accelgor.
Yeah, that's like that. That's our more recent years, I think.
Hmm.
I think Trevenant and Accelgor made a pretty big splash in. Uh, it didn't actually get played that much, to be honest. I think
Right.
Jason Klaczynski and Ross were like two of the people who stuck by it for the most. I remember Jason brought it to Orlando Regionals when he made day two, and he played it with
Hmm.
like a Nine Tails tech and all
Right.
this other stuff to keep his lab in play.
Hmm. Yeah, and it won seniors worlds in 2014.
I
Yeah,
think so. Trent Orndorff did.
yeah, right. And that played a Dustnor line, which I think that was pretty big debate amongst Trevenant and Accelgor players, whether you played a stage two and a typically stage one deck
Hmm.
just to help with your math or not, or if you just kind of went consistent, going for your Trevenant lock and just take the knockouts as they come. Um, but either way, that was a deck that I think played, even though it wasn't played that much, it weighed heavily on players' minds going into Worlds 2014.
Hmm.
As we saw, Vrizzy and Genesec dominated that tournament
Yeah.
even after Pyro won nationals, and I think in large part was because people played it because they knew it had a good Trevenant and Accelgor matchup. And I think people were worried about that deck. I know Dean Nizam and Mike Diaz, I believe, both played Trevenant and Accelgor at Worlds that year. And I'm sure there was a couple other good players as well.
Myself, I was like, I played in the grinder that year, and I was terrified of Trevenant and Accelgor. I was like, how do I deal with this? What do I do? So I played like Plasma with like heavy answers to it.
Yeah, I'm sure you played Vrizzy and Genesect. I mean, Vrizzy in the
Yeah.
past. I'm reminded of another fun Accelgor deck that was actually really. It was Cities, I think 2014 Cities, Empoleon Accelgor. So Empoleon being the dive and draw one. So that was a deck that Sam Chen really liked and piloted quite a bit. And so Empoleon let you discard a card from your hand and draw two cards.
Yep.
So the idea was that you could hit with Accelgor, draw extra cards with Empoleon, and always have the lock going. But then you also had you had like a 4-2-4 line of Empoleon, and Empoleon was a pretty good attacker itself. So you could hit something. You could basically two-shot anything and only get hit one time back.
Yeah.
Which was pretty strong considering that Empoleon had 140 HP. If your opponent can't take a one-hit knockout on that Empoleon on their one attack, then they were kind of
Yeah, no,
they were
really
going they were going to fall behind in the prize trade essentially.
And the deck probably put things like Miltank and other attackers. So it wasn't more really an Accelgor deck, but one where Accelgor was the sidekick as opposed to the main star in
Right,
most of the
right,
other Accelgor decks we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. The other big one that I have on my list is Donphan Accelgor. So that came into prominence last year, 2 years ago at Philly Regionals.
I remember that Dylan Bryan brought some
Dylan
weird
Bryan.
Donphan deck.
Yeah, so Dylan. So that was one of the first regionals of the year. That was actually my first regional back playing really competitively, and I played Eviltall and made top eight. But Dylan Bryan had an absolute tear with Donphan Dragons on the first day in standard. This was also the first tournament where we had standard day one and expanded day two. So everybody was really not sure exactly how to approach this dichotomy. And so, yeah, Dylan crushed it on day one with Donphan Dragons, and then surprised all of us on day two coming in with Donphan Accelgor. Now, I remember hearing about this and thinking, why would you play that? Like, Donphan already moves to the bench. Accelgor moves to the bench. Why do you need to play both of them? Like, pick one strategy. But and even throughout the tournament, I like sat next to Dylan a couple rounds, saw it going, and saw him doing well. He ended up making top eight. I forget. I think he lost in top eight. But then a couple weeks later, as I was preparing for cities, I had an expanded city, and I picked the deck up and played a few games, and I was like, "Wow, this is really good." And so I played it. I played it at a cities, and I got second because and you played 4 Robo Sub, and it seemed so weird, but the deck was really, really, really strong. So another fun Accelgor deck.
Yeah. I remember like I saw it and I like read about it and I was like, how does this make any sense? Like Donphan Dragons I get because you're sitting behind walls, but like, what do you do in a deck that just doesn't play walls? Your wall is just Robo Sub.
Yeah, very, very strange. So I guess kind of the idea was you would, similar to the Empoleon deck, actually, you would Accelgor as your first hit, which would bring them up to like 50 or like 60, 70, 80, 90 damage if you had Verbank in play, whatever. And then with Donphan, you would spinning turn for the second knockout, or for the 2-hit KO to finish the knockout, and then you can send up the Robo Sub to take a hit. But after that first hit with the Accelgor, you don't need to send up Robo Sub because they're paralyzed. So you just send up another free retreater. Maybe it's another Accelgor or something like that.
Like I think it played like Haluchas and stuff too back then.
Right. Yeah, Halucha was quite good. Talking about it makes me want to go and revisit it for expanded right now.
Oh God.
I'm thinking like, why is it not good now? I don't know. So maybe I'll look into that. But yeah, so Donphan Accelgor, that was kind of it for a while until Bob Zhang and Ross Cawthon made Wobbuffet Accelgor become popular after both doing well at regional championships
And I remember
last year.
Accelgor just like kind of died out. People just stopped talking about it. Like we had the occasional when we saw the standard expanded thing. Some people would do really well on day one and then bring it into day two. I remember Jason, like I said, Jason brought it to Florida on day two. But I remember he ended up hitting both Squeaky and Kevin Baxter playing like speed Guardy with like Wonder Energies, and he just lost.
Yeah, right. Well, here's the thing. Now in the current expanded format, there are more hard counters to Accelgor than there has ever been in the history of the card. There is Wonder Energy, which is specific to Fairy, but not specific to Fairy. Pokemon Center Lady is so hard to deal with. With 4 VS Seeker in every deck, if they play a Pokemon Center Lady and they're not weak to grass, you just probably lose unless they prize it. But
Yeah, there's AZ.
and AZ is played in essentially every single deck. So even though that's not quite as hard of a counter to Accelgor, it's still very annoying. A lot of decks run Keldeo, which is also very annoying to deal with. So Accelgor, really, its success hinges on whether or not people are playing these cards.
Right. And expanded is so vast right now. Like Philly was, I saw everything. There's like we have
Literally.
so many sets and adding more and more sets. I think the expanded format's very healthy, but at the same time, it's like, man, it's so stressful going and thinking about it. Like you've got to plan for Accelgor, you've got to plan for like Manectric, you've got to plan for like all these like fringe decks, and you're like, what do I tech for? What is the answer?
Yeah, and there's not really a good one because you're going to take an L somewhere. It's just the reality of the format.
And you're the one who had the most recent success with Accelgor, finishing second in Philly.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of that has to do with, again, like people are aware of it, were aware of Accelgor web effect going into the tournament, but it was not, and still is not, I don't think, in most people's minds, a top five deck.
Yeah, what to
Maybe,
worry about.
maybe even it's like maybe borderline top 10 to worry about. I think people do think it's a top 10 deck, but not that it's going to be one of the 5 to 10 most popular decks. And because of that, they didn't play the super hard counter that Pokemon Center Lady or Olympia are. If they thought about it, unless you're Jimmy McClure, you played Olympia, but they opted for the softer counters that are more useful in other situations, right? They opted to play AZ, they opted to play Keldeo because, in general, those are better cards against 15 different decks.
Yeah, they fit across the field. Whereas like PCL is just like I'm going to specifically address like some sort of status condition, and in most Evital decks, like the Laser Verbank combo has fallen out of favor,
Right.
and so it's just at that point you're just taking for Accelgor, which is really the only thing that does status conditions at this point.
So Accelgor Wobbuffet, I think, is still in a pretty good spot in the metagame right now. It has probably the single best Greninja matchup of any deck, and San Jose reminded us again that Greninja is still very much a viable deck, and probably a top 5 deck as well in expanded. Yveltal Maxi, if it's a close matchup for Accelgor Web, but if they don't play Keldeo, I think it's favored. I think it's 60-40 for Accelgor. Like AZ is annoying, but that means they're discarding their energy. If they have Keldeo, that means they can Lysander or Shelmet up, Keldeo rush and retreat, and take a knockout. And eventually they might be able to run you out of Accelgors. With just AZ, they're knocking out a Wobbuffet. I'm okay if they knock out a Wobbuffet.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And Evital Maxi being the, I guess, most popular, still best deck in format. Shocking how Evital and Greninja are basically dominating both formats.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think we're also going to see a Accelgor Wobbuffet be even in a better position once this Giratina promo comes out.
Yes, I agree.
Giratina promo, I don't know. It's hard to say exactly how it'll affect the expanded format. Will it be the same as Karen to Night March, where, yes, it made Night March less popular, but Night March is still very much a viable deck. I think it'll probably be something like that, where Trevenant becomes a little bit less popular, see a little bit less success, but it's still played.
Right.
But Trevenant is probably Accelgor's worst matchup of popular decks. So Giratina promo can only help it coming out. You might even play Giratina promo yourself in the deck.
I can see it. It seems like a viable one-off tag. If you can find it, it could really help out.
Right. Because Silent Fear is really the reason that you have such a bad matchup. If they opt to not go into the break and they're just tree slamming, it gives you a lot of time to try and set up. When I played John Crespo in the finals at Philly, I won a game. It's not like it's a totally unbeatable matchup. So perhaps Giratina promo will bring it closer to 50-50, and then Accelgor will be an even more prominent deck. But then the cycle continues, right? And then
The counters and then Accelgor has to fall again in favor, and then
yeah, exactly.
it's a very cyclical deck.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like Yveltal EX, right? Where like Yveltal EX, even if every single deck is countering it, Yveltal EX is still going to be super good, super powerful. Accelgor, unfortunately, is not like that. If people are playing hard counters to it, they will beat you.
Yeah, sadly. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up Accelgor. I don't know where it'll go for the future because we don't know what expanded is crazy with all these numerous amounts of sets. Any set being added changes something small. One deck could rise to prominence, one goes down in the tier list. So any small change in expanded is crazy. Every promo card has some sort of an impact, which is crazy to think about in such a big format. But it looks like Accelgor isn't on everyone's radar, but the people who love it still love it, I think.
Yep, absolutely. We'll have to see what Sun and Moon brings us. I'm very excited to see how Giratina and the next set affect both formats.
Yeah, and that should pretty much wrap up all of Accelgor. You guys can find Mikey on Six Prizes. He puts out articles pretty regularly. You can catch him on Facebook. Overall, super nice guy, super good player. Ask him questions. I'm sure he'll respond.
Yeah, hit me up, guys. Also, look out. I'm going to try and stream some more like best of 5, best of 7 matches with Pablo and maybe some other people in the future on my Twitch channel.
Those are super interesting to watch.
Yep. So look out for that on Hey Fonte, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be here next week with a different guest. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.